Global warming is forecast to have a catastrophic effect on weather all over the planet. Project Popeye had opened the door to a new and dangerous type of warfare. The firestorm it created led to an international treaty banning all use of weather modification for military purposes. But this didn't stop governments from continuing to explore ways of modifying the weather, sometimes for highly questionable purposes. For decades, the Soviet Union seeded clouds before they reached Moscow in order to prevent rainfall on their big military parades. Harmless enough? But evidence has recently come to light that the Soviet authorities also use this technology for something much more sinister, the effects of which are still being felt today. 26th of April 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine exploded, spewing hundreds of tons of radioactive material into the atmosphere and creating the most horrific nuclear disaster in history. In 1992, Dr. Alan Flowers was one of the first Western scientists allowed into the area to examine the extent of the radioactive fallout around Chernobyl. He was working in Gomel, in the Republic of Belarus, in a region that lies between Chernobyl and Moscow.
I was with my research group measuring levels of radioactivity in the soils and also the levels of radiation dose that the population were exposed to. And we found, even 5 years after the Chernobyl accident, the population were still being subjected to levels of dose 20 to 30 times higher than normal environmental radiation levels.
Many children in Belarus were showing the effects of intense radiation poisoning. But how was this possible so far from the reactor?
We would not normally expect, at a distance of 150 to 200 kilometers, such high levels of radioactivity, unless, of course, there had been some very unusual and intense rain.
Following the explosion, there was a build-up of heavily radioactive rain clouds above Chernobyl. The prevailing winds threatened to blow these radioactive clouds towards Russia and the major cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg. But the rain never reached these cities. Instead, bouts of very heavy rain fell on the southeastern corner of Belarus, the same area that Dr. Flowers revealed to be showing unusually high levels of radioactivity. Disturbingly, many eyewitnesses claimed that the rainfall was caused by cloud seeding.
One of our colleagues told us about the Sunday immediately after Chernobyl, when he drove back from the city of Gomel in very heavy rain and noticing aeroplanes in the sky with coloured materials coming out and trailing them.
There were eyewitnesses that saw the planes. And after the planes had passed, the black rainfall started.
Dr. Zion Pazniak, a Belarusian scientist and politician, is convinced that to save Moscow, the Soviet authorities deliberately rained out radioactive material on Belarus and openly accused them of doing so. Today, he lives in exile.
I can speak freely about anything I want now, though I know if I ever go back to Belarus, I'll be killed. I know that.
Dr. Pazniak believes that people in his country were sacrificed to prevent the disaster spreading elsewhere.
They were afraid that the clouds would move to the Russian region, and there would be a possibility of rainfall over Moscow or St. Petersburg. That's why they decided to rain out the clouds on the heads of the people of Belarus.
The Moscow authorities denied that cloud seeding had taken place after the accident. However, last year, at the 20th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster, among those honored for their bravery was a pilot called Major Alexei Grushin. The award he received was for cloud seeding operations during the Chernobyl cleanup.
I am proud to say that I took part in the operations back in 1986. My comrades are proud as well. The area where my crew was actively influencing the clouds was near Chernobyl, not only in the 30-kilometer zone, but out to a distance of 50, 70, even 100 kilometers. The plane was equipped with artillery shells, which were filled with a seeding material, silver iodide. And we were following orders from the ground regarding which zones we were required to seed. The wind direction was moving from west to east, and the radioactive clouds were threatening to reach the highly populated areas of Moscow, Voronezh, Nizhny Novgorod and Yaroslavl. If the rain had fallen on those cities, it would have meant a catastrophe for millions.
During this cleanup operation, Major Grushin, his crew and his plane were heavily exposed to radiation.
Once we landed at the airport, I was ordered to park my plane in a separate place. People came from upwind towards us. They were dressed in anti-radiation outfits and held devices to measure radiation. They reached the plane, and a few seconds later, their devices recorded such high radiation that it made them turn around and run away. The plane was highly contaminated. We were given a place in the airport where nobody was parked, neither planes, no equipment, no people.
The ruins of the Chernobyl power plant stayed highly radioactive for long after the explosion. And Major Grushin said he and others continued to conduct cloud seeding missions months after the blast. Another Russian pilot, who does not wish to be identified, has since confirmed that cloud seeding operations took place as early as 2 days after the explosion. Were the actions of the Soviet authorities justified? Clearly, they faced a terrible dilemma.
You are faced with the fact that a radioactive cloud is there in the sky. That radioactive cloud and the radioactive material in it is going to fall down somewhere. It is going to fall on a human population somewhere. So if you are in Moscow, you have a very difficult decision to make. Do you let nature take its course, and that may then result in this cloud falling on millions and millions of people in Moscow? Or do you intervene? And do you use the technical resources that you have and try to minimize the number of population that this cloud will affect.
The trouble was, the secrecy which surrounded events at Chernobyl meant that the Belarusian people were completely unaware of the coming rain.
The local population talk about how there was absolutely no warning before these heavy rains and the radioactive fallout arrived. Now, if somebody in Moscow knew that there was going to be artificial fallout created in this area, it would have been quite possible to mitigate against that by warning the population to stay indoors, by distributing potassium iodide tablets. It is quite clear that these actions did not take place.
The high levels of radiation found in Belarus have led to dramatic increases in leukemia, thyroid cancers, and child defects.
I had lots of friends in the area where the cloud seeding took place. They had to move away from their homes, and their children became ill. Thyroid cancer has increased amongst children by 50 times in the area where the cloud seeding took place. If there had been no cloud seeding, there would be no radiation. Even if the radiation had reached that far, it would never have been on such a huge scale. They decided to keep the cloud seeding quiet. They thought that the public would never find out about it. Everything would stay a secret and nobody would need to take responsibility.
Today's Premiership highlights coming up in Match of the Day 2 next, and then Graham Norton Uncut with guests including Barbara Windsor at 11:20.